All right, so I got some new polling data here that is really just reinforcing one of the arguments that I've been making throughout the entire course of the pandemic, which is that the current status quo of how we are operating with the global production and distribution of vaccines is nowhere near adequate enough, and the solutions are very obvious and glaring and out in the open, and yet we still have a situation where a handful of wealthy Western countries are basically hoarding the entire supply of vaccines, preventing a lot of these poor countries from getting access to them at reasonable cost, while simultaneously protecting the vaccine patents of these big pharma companies that have already profited billions and billions of dollars from these vaccines. They're choosing to protect those vaccine patents instead of allowing for global production to ramp up and allowing all these different factories that are sitting idly by around the world to actually start producing vaccines and distributing them as quickly and efficiently as possible. So it's a ridiculous situation we have right now, and I just want to get into, just to give you a perspective on how ridiculous the current status quo is. So according to David Adler here, he's right. Wow, COVAX, the great hope for global vaccination, is a fucking travesty. Here's the percentage of supply promises that have actually been met. So for the J&J vaccine, we have 0%. For the Moderna vaccine, we have 0%. For the Novavax vaccine, we have 0%. And then for Pfizer, 4%, Serum, 10%, AstraZeneca, 38%. So again, completely abysmal fucking travesty, as he accurately pointed out there. Again, just another metric. Low-income countries have received just 0.2% of all COVID-19 shots given. Okay, so again, this is not a tenable or lasting or sustainable situation that we have right now. We already have the Delta variant, and we all saw how quickly that spread across the United States. Now, new cases are like 99% the Delta variant. So it's very easy for new variants to emerge all around the world when you just let COVID spread rampantly. It's very obvious that we're going to have new variants continuing to emerge as long as we let COVID spread around without any checks on it. And you're going to have new variants that are increasingly resistant to the vaccines, reduce their efficacy, increase the transmissibility, and increase the potentially the deadliness of the disease. And we're just allowing this situation to perpetually happen into the future, right? So we have a situation where if you continue to let these spread, we're going to have new variants. Those variants will undoubtedly, inevitably reduce the efficacy of the vaccines. And we're just on this cyclical loop that nobody seems to be giving a shit about actually addressing. And the solutions for actually addressing these problems are pretty simple. I mean, it would be basically one of two things. Either one, you get rid of the vaccine patents and allow for global production to ramp up to full capacity and allow the distribution to happen that way. You might have to sacrifice some, big pharmaceutical profits, but that's okay. That's a good thing that will end up paying for itself in the long run. And number two, the second option that you could do, if not releasing the vaccine patents, which you should do regardless, but the second option would be, okay, we could use something like the National Defense Authorization Act, ramp up production here domestically, and then produce billions and billions of vaccines here, and then distribute them around the world ourselves. So you got to do either one of those things, right? The first one is the much more simpler option that's actually on the table and will actually require a lot less effort. All you would have to do is just stand up to the big pharma companies, but of course they're not doing that right now. But here's the polling data, basically just to show you not only how effective this would be in an economic sense, because if you vaccinate the entire global population, the economies are going to be able to reopen faster. You're not going to have people dying. You're not going to have the humanitarian costs. You're also not going to have continued variants popping up all over the place that continue to affect our own economy here. It just makes sense from every perspective that we would release the vaccine patents and ramp up global production. And this is just reinforcing that from a political angle. So 7 in 10 American voters support U.S. investment in a global vaccine manufacturing program. So here, according to Public Citizen, almost 7 in 10 American voters favor the U.S. government investing in a worldwide vaccine manufacturing program, and 8 in 10 say it's important that all countries have ample access to vaccines, according to a new poll released today by Public Citizen and Lake Research Partners. The poll of likely 2022 voters found that in addition to the 69% of Americans supporting a U.S. investment in global manufacturing, half strongly favor it, and the partisan breakdown of support includes 86% of Democrats, 61% of independents, and a majority of Republicans. And the poll also found that 57% rate as very important and 81% rate as important that all countries have access to the vaccines so that they can vaccinate their citizens quickly and efficiently. 42% say that the U.S. should play an active role in the global distribution of COVID-19 vaccines and provide funding to ensure access, while just 20% say the U.S. should not. So overwhelming majority of Americans recognize the current status quo is completely unsustainable and completely unacceptable. And they continue down here, regarding the sharing of vaccine technology and information, so those patents that we were just talking about, 64% of respondents supported the waiving of intellectual property protections so other countries may produce vaccines, and 74% support the Biden administration calling on Pfizer, Moderna, and other drug makers to share vaccine development knowledge with other countries in exchange for reasonable compensation, whatever that may be. The first thing that they just talked about was much more reasonable, just getting rid and waiving the intellectual property rights. And so Public Citizen revealed the polling results in a virtual press conference Thursday, attended by U.S. Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, sorry if I mispronounced that, who spoke on the ongoing legislative efforts to increase global COVID-19 vaccine production. And the NOVID Act, as it is called, sponsored by her, would provide a $34 billion investment that public research found would make 8 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses in 1 year. Okay, so $34 billion, right? A tiny fraction, like, a 3% of our military budget could pay for 8 billion COVID vaccines. Think about that for a second. It's obviously an investment that is worthwhile. Again, not just from a humanitarian aspect, but also from an economic aspect, because you would open up all these other avenues for the global economy to continue functioning as it does, even under our current exploitative global capitalist order, right? So even if you were a capitalist, even if you were somebody who loves big pharma, you should still be trying to do this because in the long run, it would be beneficially economically. So it just doesn't make sense from any angle unless you are like somebody who literally works as a lobbyist for these big pharma companies. The only reason to keep the vaccine patents as they are right now is to serve the interests of those big pharma companies who have, again, already made billions and billions of dollars off of these vaccines. It's just, there's no argument against it now, including that it's also politically popular. It's extremely overwhelmingly politically popular. As they pointed out there, even a majority of Republicans. And so listen, we keep hearing the same arguments that are trotted out in response to these very basic and obvious solutions to the current problem that's at hand. And one of the main ones that you typically hear in these types of situations is, well, if you get rid of the vaccine patents, then, companies in the future, if there's another global pandemic, well, they won't have the motivation, they won't have the profit incentive to innovate and develop new COVID vaccines. That's complete bullshit, okay? The notion, the idea that these pharmaceutical executives who are making billions of dollars from these vaccines, the idea that they innovated anything is completely patently absurd, okay? Because these executives who sit at the top of the company, they didn't do anything other than buy the technology and patent the technology that scientists, that biologists invented and innovated and worked on, okay? It wasn't the profit motive, okay? It was scientists accomplishing a goal, right? It's microbiologists who were working on these vaccines and vaccines similar to this for years and years and years on end, right? So that's the actual situation that we have. The idea that you're going to stifle innovation by nationalizing big pharma, which we should do, is ridiculous. If anything, the way that our current for-profit privatized pharmaceutical industry operates is stifling innovation in and of itself, because as we knew from Katie Porter when she was railing against one of these big pharma executives in a congressional hearing, these companies are primarily spending, and when I say primarily, I mean like a vast majority of their profits don't go towards innovating. They don't go towards like research and development as they like to pretend. They go towards executive bonuses, and they go towards stock buybacks, and they go towards shareholders, okay? That's where the money is going. That's where the profits are going as they continue to price gouge the entire world. These profits are not being invested in research and development. So if you were to nationalize big pharma, you could have the government step in and start producing drugs that may not necessarily be profitable, but would be good for public health. You could have the government step in and reduce the money that they would be wasting on executive bonuses and on stock buybacks and shit like that. You could instead invest that actually in research and development and increase innovation, expand innovation on these medical technologies. And then at the same time, you don't have to price gouge the entire world for those medicines. So it's a win-win. We absolutely should be nationalizing big pharma. Obviously, that's not tenable under the Joe Biden administration, but what is tenable and what we have to keep pushing for is what they were just calling for, the overwhelming majority of Americans are calling for right now, which is get rid of the fucking patents and allow for global manufacturing to increase to full capacity, because it's not at full capacity right now. We learned months and months and months ago, as Bill Gates was lying to the American people and saying there are no idle vaccine factories that are sitting around waiting to produce, produce? No, there actually are some. We heard directly from those factories. There are some in Canada. There are some all over the world that are ready and willing to produce these vaccines at full capacity if they had the technological know-how and if the vaccine patents weren't preventing them legally from doing so. So the solutions to the current problem right now of the entirety of the developing world not having access to vaccines are very obvious. One, relinquish the vaccine patents. Two, start ramping up domestic production and then distribute those to the entire world, right? Imagine if we had, vaccines dropping all around the world instead of bombs dropping everywhere around the world. That might be a good representation of the United States, right? Instead of having those imperialist enforcement mechanisms enforced all around the world, maybe people would actually start, to turn around the public opinion globally of the United States empire. But, you have to do those two things: get rid of the patents, ramp up global domestic manufacturing, and then distribute it globally. And this is what you got to do. I mean, it's very obvious. And then on top of that, at the end of the day, nationalize big pharma. The profit motive doesn't belong anywhere near this industry.